Hello, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Cioffi here on this Monday. I know I took 3 out of the last 4 days without a video, or 2 out of the last 3. I forget. I just desperately needed a bit of a break, and I took it. So now we're back to Monday, and we have a lot going on. So both in the short and in the long range. In fact, some interesting developments today in the long range. You know, we've been kind of on this theme that the winter is basically playing out sort of like a 2-act play, and we're in the intermission now, and the intermission period is going to last about 2 weeks. And I think, based on the models that I've been looking at over the last 2 days, we're going to see it. It seems like it's going to play out that way. We have this 2-week break, and then late next week and beyond, we're going to have maybe a second round. Now, I don't necessarily think that it's going to wind up being exactly the same as the first round. There are going to be some differences, and we're going to discover those differences, I think, when we get there. So let me give a big hello to everybody. The regulars are all on board tonight. Delvin, Adam Fitz, Carl Weitz, Danilo, Cynthia Guinautis, Franklin Taylor, Iron Mind 10, Ray Hastava, and of course Delvin. So let's take a look first right off the bat to see what's happening here. And we do have a slew of blizzard warnings up tonight. Actually, fewer than were up earlier. They're kind of narrowing down a bit now that the storm is moving up toward the Great Lakes. But you can see on the watches and warning map the area in orange in eastern Nebraska, northwestern Iowa, and southwestern Minnesota, all under blizzard warnings for blowing snow and winds of 45 miles per hour. Blizzard conditions have been technically observed in pretty much all of the areas that are highlighted, and it's not for forecasting the blizzard conditions. They're already underway. Winter storm warnings up north and east of there, throughout the rest of the southeastern part of Minnesota, and then on up through what looks like the northwestern third of Wisconsin and all of the upper peninsula of Michigan, some surrounding counties in winter weather advisories. Also seeing some winter weather advisories up for interior New England for some freezing precipitation, and a winter storm warning up for northern Maine, and a few flood watches are now up for parts of southwestern New York and the middle and upper Hudson Valley, I believe. Out in the west, we've got some winter storm warnings up across northern Washington and up through northern Idaho, a few watches up in some of the mountains as we move further west into the state of Washington and down into parts of Oregon and even into northern California. So that takes care of at least what's happening watches and warnings wise. So why don't we take a look at a couple of 6 p.m. radars here. We'll go to the wide view first off, and then we can kind of zoom in on a couple of others. And here we have, you can see the swirl here on the radar signature. That is where the upper air system is playing out. And of course, on the western side of that, you've got the heavy snow that's falling through eastern Kansas. Eastern Nebraska. I have to check the obs. I'm sure it's probably snowing also in northeastern Kansas, and then extending up into southern Minnesota and Wisconsin. So this is all snow here. And then ahead of it, in the warmer air, we've got some rain showers developing across central and eastern Ohio, and even a few thunderstorms now showing up over parts of northwestern Georgia and on up through central Alabama. Looks like a little bit of a line there of strong storms, and another one that's moving across the Florida Panhandle. Remember, it wasn't too many days ago that they had snow and ice through all of this. So how quickly things change across the deep south, which it's, you know, the snow and ice was certainly a bit extraordinary. And when we get a little closer here, I'll pull up the Great Lakes radar view. And you can see the snow that's up through northern Wisconsin, through the upper peninsula of Michigan, and back into southeastern Minnesota on the edge. Rain showers across northern Illinois and on back through northern Ohio with that particular band. In the northeast, We don't have too much happening at the moment on the northern side of this. We've got a warm front that's edging down through my neck of the woods and just a little bit further to the south, so you can see some scattered shower activity offshore. Then the showers become more numerous through upstate New York, and then you start to get into some of the colder air where you're getting some freezing precipitation out of all of this. So we are, again, in that relaxation period, and I think we're going to go and address the long range because I'm getting particularly interested in all of this. One of the things that I started noticing over the weekend, we've been talking about these teleconnection indices, and the one that has really starting to stand out a little bit is the East Pacific Oscillation, or the EPO, forecast to go from slightly positive. These scales usually run, 1 or 2 standard deviations from the mean, and it's kind of weakly positive here until we get to this the end of this coming weekend. And then after that, the EPO drops to negative and begins to accelerate downward as we start to move through the first few days of February. Excuse me. I think this of the indices that we watch, this one is very important from the standpoint of indicating cold. That EPO index, when it goes negative, indicates a colder pattern in the east. However, there are other things that we have to look at here that are just as important. And one of the things we're going to watch for is this PNA index, the Pacific North America index. If you really want to have sustained cold in the east and winter weather in the east, you got to have that PNA positive and the EPO negative. Well, it looks like we're going to have that negative EPO. The PNA is off the wall negative. It goes through 2 spikes here, one around January 28th to the 30th, tries to get up toward positive, but never quite makes it, and then comes back down strongly negative, and then starts to rise again as we get toward February 3rd through the 5th. So the question is, what happens beyond this time frame, assuming that this doesn't change on the next run? But what happens, does this keep going up toward the 0 line and maybe beyond that? Or is it going to hover, maybe just get less negative or get close to neutral and never really go positive? So we're going to have to watch that closely. The North Atlantic Oscillation is weakly positive and then just kind of straddles the neutral line starting from late this week, and then it's just slightly positive after that, but it's very weakly positive. So we're going to watch all of these as they change over the next couple of days, but this EPO negative signature has shown up now for the last 3 days, and I think it's telling us that we got to start paying attention to this. So where does this all play out? All right, well, why don't we bring up the latest GFS run? I've actually been very impressed at how the GFS is showing this, even though that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be right, but it seems to be insistent on every run where the warmer part of this equation becomes less and less, and the colder part of the equation becomes more and more. So rather than look at the surface first, I think we're going to go right to the upper air and see what's happening here. So, you've got your vigorous system here at the moment that reflects the storm that's moving through the Midwest, and that is going to lift up toward the Great Lakes and Northeast, brings a cold front through, and we will see some rather chilly air here for Wednesday, but particularly for Thursday into Friday before we undergo another warm-up. The trough, after all, is still primarily in the west, although we're not going to get crazy warm. I mean, we are going to see temperatures warm up again next weekend, and then it's after this period that we start to get into the bigger changes, and this was where I'm going to widen out. So if you notice here, the flow across the United States next weekend is not really all that warm to speak of. You've got, you have a jet that's out of Canada. It's not too strong, but it is there. running from northwestern Canada into southeastern Canada and into the northeast. You know, you have this sort of gentle bowl here in the eastern states, kind of just some gentle troughing. There's a cutoff low in the Gulf of Alaska. You've got a big upper high that's sitting up in easternmost areas of Russia. And what the model is doing is that while it tries to bring up a ridge in the east, it is nowhere near. Each run seems to be weaker and weaker with that ridge in the east, because the trough that it develops out in the west is not nearly as strong. And now we are into February 1st. Now watch what happens in this time frame. You wind up establishing a vortex in Hudson Bay. We are now at Friday, February 2nd. You have building pressures on either side in the North Atlantic and also back over Siberia. So you have pressures building across the polar regions. And this allows the jet stream to develop from northern Canada right down into the eastern part of the United States. And there it is by the time we get to day 16, a fairly established cold flow. The questions again will be, is this going to hold, or is it going to pull out and lift out or not? The model wants to build a rather strong upper ridge in the Atlantic up toward Greenland. And you also have ridging out in the west, so that would suggest to me that this might attempt to hold for a while. Perhaps part of this will lift out and part of it will rotate around, and maybe another arm comes down. I think the argument that we are seeing basically a split in the winter season, that first half with that brutal cold air, this 2 week or so break in between the intermission, and then a second half. Now, I'm of the opinion that it may not set up exactly the same way. There may be a few differences this time around. Perhaps the difference may be that the flow might be more favorable for more weather systems to move through and get involved, rather than have the longer dry stretches like we had during the cold blast, and the weather systems we did tend to see, except for the blizzard, tended to be, let's call it, moisture starved more than anything else. But I think when we look at this, when we look at the, when I looked at the ensembles from earlier, they all kind of are trying to get to the same place that the operational did. The ridge on the ensembles is a little further west than you might like, but that's the ensembles. We'll wait to see how the ensembles play catch up sometimes. Sometimes they lead. But in view of the overall signals that I'm seeing, I'm thinking that there's going to be, again, a second wave to deal with in the eastern two-thirds of the United States. The question will be whether that Pacific North America index gets positive, so that, in other words, a strong ridge develops out in the west that would favor a prolonged cold, or is it going to be more transient in nature where it comes in, pulls out, comes in, pulls out? That is going to be something that we're going to have to wait to figure out as far as how that plays out. Why don't we take a look at snowfall for the next 48 hours at least, so we can let me get out of the ensembles, I'm sorry, so let me go back to the GFS. Let's pull up the 24-hour snowfall map, and let us also go back to the beginning, since the bulk of the snowfall that's coming now is over the Great Lakes, and you can see that there's some good solid 6-inch amounts being produced. Now again, there's already snow on the ground, so this will be in addition to what's already fallen throughout much of northwestern Wisconsin, through the upper peninsula of Michigan, and then also into southeastern Canada. And after this goes by, there really isn't too much that happens over the next 10 days, although for some reason toward the end of the month it does suddenly show this measurable snow moving across Pennsylvania. So why don't we see? I think what it does is, on this run, it does want to show, once this low pulls out, one of the big things that's changed, by the way, is the fact that the models that went from basically showing three consecutive systems going toward the Great Lakes. Now after this one goes out, it really doesn't show very much of anything. Just a cold front that comes through here along about January 28th or so, and then a weak system that kind of moves in southeastward, and you have to wait till after day 9 and day 10. That's when the colder air starts to come in, and the model models out a couple of waves with snow with it. Now, who knows if this is real, because now we're at days 11 and 12 in the model sequence, so we know that it tends to get squirrely, but this is very cold air that's being shown by the end of the period with that upper flow that we saw from the when I was showing you the upper air. Big high coming down, very, very cold air streaming down out of Canada. But again, this is, now we're at February 6th, day 14 on the long range. So we're way out in Disneyland here. So let's look at Europe and see what's going on for our friends over on the other side. And we did anticipate a warm-up this week, so we've got these wet systems that are coming in to Western Europe with the absence, that trough pulling out, that deep upper trough pulling out. It would tend to rule against any kind of prolonged snow. And when we look through the long range, it really doesn't look like too much is going on. In fact, a big high kind of centers right over England and Ireland there around day 11 and 12. And then late in the period, as it turns cold in the eastern part of the United States, this is way out though, but it'll be fun to see if it turns out this way with respect to the weather in Europe. Still trying to kind of keep all of this stuff in my head in terms of what goes on here versus what goes on over there. And when we look at the upper air, and we'll roll it back. Now there's that big upper high. Remember on that long range we saw that big upper high building up in the Atlantic toward Greenland, so you see it there, and the flow comes from the Arctic, from Greenland over through England. If this signature is correct that far out in the long range, which we have no confidence that it will be, but I just wanted to show you why it has that snow there. But there's that ridge that builds in Western Europe, and there's that next upper trough that kind of comes in and weakens. Another ridge follows up through days 8 and 9, and it's still there as we get into day 9 and 10, and even strengthens there. Big upper high sitting right over Ireland and England. That's what we saw, that surface high sitting there for a while, and then it gradually breaks down, and you start to get that high building up toward Greenland toward the end of the period, again assuming that is going to be reality here. So a lot to focus on going forward. We're going to watch very, very closely what happens here with respect to the long range. The time frame for a switch makes complete sense. As I said, you get these 2 weeks on, 1 week off kind of. The primary pattern. Then you get that break for 2 or 3 weeks, and then it goes back again to something resembling, but not necessarily identical to. Winter of 95, 96 was kind of was just like that. After the primary pattern sort of broke down in the middle of January, it was about 3 weeks, and then it fired up again during the first week of February, and then that pattern just sort of held. But there was a bit of a difference in that the first part had a tendency to produce bigger storms. The second part had a tendency to produce storms that were a bit more moderate in nature, but still some pretty hefty snow producers. Instead of 1 foot plus snow events, it was more along the lines of 6 to 12 inch snow events, but there was a bunch of them rather than just 1 or 2 big ones. So let's go to the board, and give me 1 second here, and just you guys, some of you may see a brief commercial break at this point, but just bear with me. You had a tornado watch last night, Franklin Taylor, up in your part in Arkansas. Would not be a surprise. That I was not surprised that there was with the strength of that front that was sweeping on through here. Hi to Chris Alley and Stephen Franco. By the way, on my website today, I did put up a piece about the change that's coming and what's going on. So if you want to read more on that, you can go to meteorologistjoecioffi.com. Chris Alley, I hope to see you Saturday in Lindenhurst. I will be there. Those of you on Long Island, my next library appearance will be on Saturday, January 27th at 2 p.m. at the Lindenhurst Library in Lindenhurst on Long Island. Cullen, 13 inches for Northwest New Jersey so far this winter, and I've had 26, and I'm on Long Island. So once again, the coast has the most this winter, at least so far. Let's see, just trying to get to everybody. Did I work with Joe Fury at Long Island News 12? Used to play basketball with him. Why does that name ring a bell? In the late 80s in the Norwalk Y before he gained a ton of weight. Very nice guy. You know, that name really rings a bell. You're pushing me back now 30 years, but that name does ring a bell, Carl Weitz. I gotta do a little digging. It'll come to me. David Schwartz, when do I expect the PNA to go positive? Well, I don't know. That's going to be the key question, if and when it does go positive. If it doesn't, that's going to be one of the primary differences, and it's going to argue against, sustained cold. But that was today's run. Let's see what the overnights do with this. These indices that are forecast, they do change from run to run. So how the runs change are going to impact what we see. So let's wait and see how the models handle this. Don't be surprised if you see. I wouldn't necessarily at this point look for if the PNA spikes from strong negative to neutral. If we see an upward spike, I'm not so much concerned that it goes positive. But if I want to see that thing spike up toward neutral, and then we'll see what happens beyond that. Let's see. Here we go. I do know Harrison Weather Center, Cash 082. I do very much. I do speak with one of the guys involved with Harrison Weather from time to time. Yes. Let's see. When can we have a 7:15 Joe and Show on YouTube? I'm working on it, Delvin. We both have a limited amount of time, so it's kind of tough. But I'm working on it. -5 shown on Tropical Tidbits on Long Island for February 7th, Lord Kate. I didn't look at that deep, so I will take a look. But wouldn't be surprised if that upper air was right. Nasty line of storms for Cynthia Guignaudis early this morning. Not surprised with this upper air system that's sweeping on through here. Now, it's funny because this is really kind of the first, this winter, all the action has been really pretty much in the east. And then before we got into that cold blast, it was mainly in the west. The Great Lakes region has been sort of left out, but you guys at least are getting some catch up there in the northern lakes. But not in the southern lakes and in and around Chicago. There hasn't been all that much snow this season. And also for the Ohio Valley, you've had the occasional system here and there, but it has not been that sort of persistent winter storm after winter storm. And Iron Mine 10 will try to make that. If you do, please come up and introduce yourself to me. I would appreciate it. Joe Fury is the Connecticut version of me. Great. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate that. That name does ring a bell, though. I can't put my finger on it here at the moment exactly. But let me think about it and do a bit of looking back. Marine layer on eastern Long Island goes right through you. Tell me about it, William Huber. That wind had gone to east-northeast now, and that's really brought in a chill throughout much of Long Island after getting into the 50s. We had a few breaks of sun earlier today that helped to boost the temperatures up. Hi back to Robert Russo. Diodan Kumar, any colder air coming? Well, let's wait. We still may have to wait another 10 days or so to get that process going, but models are suggesting that we are going to be going in that particular direction. All right, folks, going to call it a night at this point. I hope everybody had a great weekend, and we will keep everybody updated on the website, so make sure you check that out, meteorologistjoecioffi.com. And also 9:15 Eastern Time tonight on my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. If you haven't joined up there, join us roughly 9:15 Eastern Time. We will have tonight's version of the Joe Cioffi Show, or the Joe and Joe Show, and we'll talk more about this and the pattern going forward. We'll get Joe Rayo's opinions on it all. And in the meantime, everybody stay safe. And we will see you on Tuesday, unless you go to the Joe and Joe Show on Facebook.